there's a huge fascination in dangerousness, and partly because they're very difficult to spot.
I wanted to see the dark side of humanity. I wanted to understand the most dangerous people in the world. The biggest thing is that we miss the grooming. Even if you're not privy to the grooming, it's happening. So a predator is always aware of the victim or the potential victim before it happens, especially in narcissism.
Do you know how to spot a dangerous individual? Could your neighbor be not as safe as you think they are? To answer that question, Dr. Leslie Dobson, the host of the podcast Intentionally Disturbing, joins me to talk about how to recognize unsafe people. Dr. Leslie Dobson, thank you so much for joining me today. I came across your Instagram and was very intrigued about the topic. I'd love to have you introduce yourself a little bit and how you got interested in the darker side of psychology.
Yeah, definitely the dark side. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist. And so what that means is I did a bachelor's in clinical psychology, but then I did a master's in Freudian psychoanalysis and dream interpretation in London. And then what I learned was that that was relatively useless in the world of business. And no one was going to pay me in America. So I came back to Loma Linda University and I did a master's in clinical psychology where I learned I could focus on forensic psychology. So then I concluded the master's with a lot of experience in forensics and then did my doctorate of psychology. And I wanted to see the dark side of humanity. I wanted to understand the most dangerous people in the world. And so I did. I started my first practicum, my first clinical experience at the Los Angeles County Jail. And they had never trained any psychology students. And I found a pretty green psychologist who was willing to do this. And so 4 of us came in and he trained us. And it was one of the most wild years of my life. I've never seen insanity to that extent, to the point where I'm talking to someone's auditory hallucinations because I have to talk to the voices in order for the person to come back and talk to me. I have to build a relationship with the voices. It was just so wild, as well as the psychopaths and the gang members. And it was just so violent. But I was beyond intrigued. And then I did a fellowship in high-risk sex offending. And I learned all about all these tests that we have to see if you have a sexual disorder, like the condom catheter, or there are computer-based tests and normative samples and statistics around what age range a child offender prefers, or a minor offender, I should say, because the pictures range from babies all the way to young women. But I got really into assessing their violence and understanding how we can determine if somebody is going to reoffend or be violent. And as I worked on the inside of jails and prisons and state hospitals, I definitely started getting, I wouldn't say PTSD, but I was having more trauma symptoms because it was so scary. There was violence every single day. And when I got pregnant, there was a hit out on me in one of the facilities. And that was the last time I went in. A very psychopathic gang member actually told me that there was a hit on me and to get out. And we had built quite a good relationship because, again, it's possible to work well with a psychopath if you know how to work it. So that's when I went into civil litigation using all of what I had learned in the state and the government with all their fancy funding to take it into civil litigation and battle out, who's telling the truth in these cases. Did someone rape someone? Are they lying? Because women do lie, right? Right. But a lot of women are telling the truth, and a lot of men are narcissistic and try to break down a woman to the point where no one believes her. So now I battle it out on both ends. And then a couple of years ago, I started social media and just sharing what I've learned in my career with people. And it's gone really well.
Yeah, I think there's a huge fascination in dangerousness, and partly because they're very difficult to spot. Back in the day, before I went into graduate program, I was a director of a runaway shelter, and I often was the lead counselor in the house. And at the time we were getting ready to close the program, and so there was I think it was only 1 or 2 adolescents in the residency. And so it was just me and these 2 kids bopping around there. And one was a 14-year-old boy, and I felt quite safe with him. He and I had a collegial relationship. I never felt any qualms or any threat with him. And he went on to the next setting and raped somebody.
Wow.
Raped an adult. And yet with me, I didn't feel any kind of alarm. And so I think that's what freaks us out. It's really scary to think that it could be your neighbor. And you might not know. I know that Ted Bundy, for example, was married and she didn't know. So what is it that we miss about dangerous personalities that leads us into either complacency or excessive fear?
For me, the biggest thing is that we miss the grooming. Even if you're not privy to the grooming, it's happening. So a predator is always aware of the victim or the potential victim before it happens, right? It's especially in narcissism, it's very rare that these are impulsive acts of violence. There are always predictors. So they're watching you, they're looking for your vulnerabilities, and they're gaining access to you. And that's why we often miss a lot of the dangerous features, because the more extreme narcissistic psychopaths are really, really good at working their way into our lives. We feel like we need them. We get to the point where we trust them. They are mirroring everything that we need, but that we offer, right? And then they've built that trust, that comfort zone, and then they start to harm us. So it works very similar to just a very generic definition of narcissism, but it's at a much higher level with the goal of, we don't want her to trust anything about herself at the end. We want to ruin her so that then we can have all the power. And then they have that predatory drive to harm. They are very stimulated by harming others.
Yeah, we don't appreciate that, do we? That's actually not only novelty, but also a pleasurable experience for them.
Yeah, I mean, most of the guys I've worked with, the psychopaths who have raped or the pedophiles, they weren't really pleased or pleasured throughout the relationship. It was all fake. But man, they were pleased when you fell asleep and they came in the back door in a mask and raped you, and then they left, and then they came back and consoled you because they didn't know who raped you. That is common. That is their thrill.
Yeah, I was aware that mine tended to do things like take photos when I was sleeping, just really vulnerable things that he knew weren't things that I'd wanted or expressly said don't do. And that, or things that he knew were conflictual. Like, for example, he would hook up with a sex worker, and then later, when I was aware of it, and then suggest that he and I go to that same theme park where he and her took pictures. And I know that he was looking forward to standing in the same spot and taking photos of the two of us together where they took pictures. Those types of really sick, hurtful, kind of degrading things to also have one over on you. I think that's the other part of this, is the dominance that's involved with these relationships.
Yeah, the misogyny, the dominance, the power, the authority. They like it.
Yeah.
And we often don't want to believe it because they've built themselves into this image in our mind that makes it unbelievable, right?
Well, yeah. So let's go back to the fact that you say they start grooming us. What give some examples of what grooming looks like that we may be unaware of it, that we might even just think this is how relationships start and build?
In particular with individuals who are psychopaths, but they are more narcissistic than antisocial, right? Because that's the psychopath. We've got that behavioral impulsivity side, but we've got that psychological manipulation side, that narcissism. So when we look at those more narcissistic psychopaths, the grooming tends to be a lot of intrigue into you. They seem very interested in you. There's a pressure to date you, to see you more frequently, to have sex with you, to push you beyond that of which you would normally be comfortable. The whole cycle of violence is there, right? But without the negative parts. So they're going to love bomb you, gift giving, just everything is going to feel like infatuation. It's going to feel like you have just the prince in a cartoon has been dropped in your lap, right? And then, they can't maintain it, right? They finally get to a point where they're like, oh, now I can start really getting what I want because I have every part of her believing me. So it's very nuanced.
Yeah. Do you find that they tend to test your level of compliance?
Definitely. I think, and especially with younger victims, and I'm not necessarily talking about children, but they will test, are you into kinkier sex? If I show you pornography, how far can I push the pornography? Can I show you BDSM or can I show you actual snuff videos? So depending on the type of harm they like to do, are they sadistic? Maybe they're masochistic. How many tests can I put in front of you? But the tests are going to start really, really small. Like you're at dinner and he looks over at a girl and says, she's really pretty. Do you think so?
Yeah, no, you're reminding me of somebody who's pursued me heavily for a romantic relationship. And I think he's very violent, actually. And we did have one date and there was a waitress in the restaurant who had all her teeth covered with gold. Now, you think about that. Think about what probably has happened to her for her to have her teeth covered like that. So he called her over and started speaking to her in Spanish. I know some Spanish. And was asking her about why she's done this to herself. And she's awkward. I mean, she's obviously ashamed. And then he says to me, so what do you think of her in front of her? And I said, I think they're very pretty. And then she left awkwardly, and I was feeling sick for her. And then he said to me, why didn't you confront her about how ugly that looked?
Ew.
I know. And I just thought, you are so sick. You are so sick. And then oh man, yeah.
That was a first date?
I had seen him once before. Now, actually, I take that back. I met him several years ago, and over years, so if I pop up somewhere, he pops up and says, let's go out. And then every time I meet him, he's like, I can't. And then I back off, and and now I know why. Because this last time, I had enough dates. I think 3 dates with him to know that this guy is extremely aggressive. Or here's another example, and I feel ashamed even sharing this. When he'd kiss me, he would bite me and get my lips to bleed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And this is a guy who doesn't know me. Can you imagine where it would go if we ended up having he scares me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And now I think because I've rejected him so many times, it's the pursuit to see if he could humiliate me, get me into something and then degrade me. But he's blocked. I have him blocked everywhere, but he keeps popping up. I mean, I get on Telegram. He goes, oh, hi. Like, oh, geez. This guy is just like a unlucky penny out there.
Yeah. I think there's something wonderful to that as well, that he's showing his cards really quickly.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's like, we don't want to, we give people another chance, but if someone's going to show their cards right away, no more chances. Red flag, walk away. There's tons of other men that will never, ever show a card like that because they love it.
Well, yeah, it's obvious he's not been in a long-term relationship, and I think it's because he hasn't learned to be more subtle about this, which is a good thing. It's a good thing for all of us out there.
Right.
You know those moments at 2 a.m. when you're replaying the conversation for the 100th time? Or when you're typing out another "I'm sorry for overreacting" text, even though deep down you know you weren't the one who should be apologizing. I get it. I've been there. And after 25 years as a clinical psychologist in my own recovery journey, I've created something I wish I had back then. Reclaim You isn't just another app. It's the support that actually shows up when you need it the most. Imagine having boundary scripts you can literally copy and paste when your mind goes blank, or daily check-ins that help you spot those sneaky patterns that keep you stuck, and grounding practices that actually work in under 5 minutes when you're spiraling. Here's what I love the most. Reclaim You tracks your healing journey, so on those days when you feel like you're back at square one, you'll have concrete proof that you're not, that you're growing, you're healing, even when it doesn't feel like that. Reclaim You launches tomorrow at studio.com/Dr. Kerry. That's studio.com/Dr. Kerry. Get real support in real time for real healing, because you deserve to choose you. Visit studio.com/Dr. Kerry and reclaim you. I want to back up, though. You talked about the narcissistic psychopath, but I know that a lot of us throw these terms around. And then there's even those that like to debate, is it even, should we be throwing these terms around? There's those who say antisocial personality disorder is the condition. That's it. There's no subtypes. And I know that Dr. Robert Hare's work, there's other people's who work who says, no, there's actually different subtypes. Then we talk about the dark triad. So what do you think about these subtypes? How do you conceptualize dangerous personalities?
Oh, I 100% agree with Hare and these subtypes. People are nuanced. We can't categorize everyone cleanly. The DSM sucks when it comes to extreme disorders, right?
Yeah.
And in my profession, we have to link up the DSM with the law. And, we have, like, we just had the case in Canada where the hockey players were found not guilty, but the NHL still banned them because their behaviors were horrific. Well, it was a failure of law. They were still rapists. So it's that we have to look at all of these complexities. And at the end of the day, we have to protect ourselves.
Right.
And we have to protect our loved ones. And we have to protect our friends and our family who are ignoring the nuances or minimizing them. Because I think the narcissism is extremely dangerous, but the antisocial component, that Machiavellian, I always say wrong, small dick syndrome, it's all there, right? And it all intermingles and it's synergistic. And that's the dangerous part.
It is, and it's fluid. That's the other part. It's a struggle I have with the cluster B as a whole group is that, in fact, I just had this conversation with a group member last night in my club, is that they said, I'm in a relationship with a borderline personality disorder, but I swear at times this person acts antisocial. I said, they probably are. That when they're enraged, there's an ego wound. They tend to become callous and ruthless, and all hell breaks loose at that point.
And I definitely think that borderline personality disorder lends to psychosis, and that when, we don't have to say psychotic, schizophrenic, but we do have to say that personality disorders, when they are wounded, leave reality. They are not in reality with us, and that is psychosis. So psychopaths also leave reality. Maybe they're not psychotic, but they are not grounded in the world that we are all living in and that we are all seeing.
Yeah, and I even found that, because I worked at a psychiatric facility, that I found that even the word psychosis is not, it's too narrow. And when we mainly confine it to a few disorders, and when I've seen it, you're right, there's people, to me, I used to say it's like they live on the fragile edge of earth, where the ground of that's reality is extremely breakable, and they sink into psychotic thinking very, very easily if threatened or insecure. So break down the types of subtypes that you see in the way that you see it. And then I want to talk about how, because you also brought up an excellent point, that the legal realm is viewing this in a completely different way than the psychological realm, and they don't actually mesh well. So I want to get into that next. But what are the subtypes as far as you see them?
Within psychopathy? I mean, I tend to hold quite strong to narcissistic personality disorder and then antisocial components. Okay. And I really feel like the behavioral impulsivity pairs very well with the egotistical, lack of empathy, lack of remorse. And then we've got the need for stimulation, but we have that need in a physical sense, but we also have that in a psychological sense. So for me, looking at the psychopathy inventory, the PCL-R, I really do agree with the 40 points, and it's really 20/20 with narcissism and psychopathy. Now, I would probably I argue that the level we use, we in America, we say you have to have 30 points to be a psychopath. I would argue that we should shift that down. Like in other countries, it can be 27, it can be 20. So
say a little bit more about the assessment, just so for those who aren't familiar with what you and I are talking about.
So there's so much training. My God. It's a semi-structured interview. So you're looking for components, these 40 components of what make a psychopath. And it's all over Google. Anybody can find it. But you're looking for that cunning, manipulative person, that charisma, the egotistical, manipulative, parasitic, gross individual that we've all seen in movies, right? Mm-hmm. But you're not just asking them these structured questions. You're engaging in a conversation with them, and you're hoping that they start to do this to you in the interview. And that's where inter-rater reliability comes in. So when you're when you're learning how to do it, you're going to have a bunch of psychology newbies doing it to the same person, and we're going to compare our scoring. And then the scoring is 0, 1, or 2. So how do you determine if somebody is parasitic? Are they leeching off people, and to what degree? Do you give them 1 point or 2? Because it really matters, right? Because if you get to 30, you're going to be seen as pretty flippin' dangerous. And in the courtroom, the judge is going to be like, oh my God, the lawyers are really going to use that. So that test is imperative, I think, to understanding the personality and understanding violence risk. And I think that test is also imperative in family court, in custody, and even if you just want to show that you are not a psychopath, have them do that test.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, thank you for that, because I'm thinking of somebody right now in a fight for her life with somebody who's really doing a good job with the court system. Yeah. He's man, she may lose her children over this, because he's so good at this. So I appreciate that.
Our judges are not well educated when it comes to coercive control, when it comes to the nuances of consent. And it's not that they're not educated in law. They are. But it's just the labels are different. It is different when it comes to, coercion needs to be one objective incident that we can explain, when really coercion to you and I as psychologists is this muddled, sticky mess of psychological emotions and thoughts and behaviors over time. No, the judge needs one coercive act.
Oh, yeah. Where I compare it to like living in carbon monoxide.
Yes.
It's the very environment that you're breathing in. I mean, I was coercively controlled and had no idea. No idea. I didn't realize that he was controlling my sleep, controlling my diet. I was losing pride. I mean, I had no, and it was given up so easily. I gave a lot of it up myself, went along with it, and didn't know that the trap was like those walls were closing in on me, getting tighter and tighter.
Right, and that is a big part of narcissism that they use against women in family court, is that narcissists are very coercive, but it is not the law.
So I asked you about how legal terms, because I know, for example, even the word insanity, we don't talk about insanity in psychology. There's no such thing as insanity. So here you are trying to mesh a psychological lexicon with a legal definition. So how does that match or doesn't match? What do you do about that?
It's difficult. I mean, I prefer a jury trial so that I can explain it to a non-narcissistic judge who will literally say, who needs a psychologist? I can read a book about it. Those piss me off. But if I can bring everything down to the 3rd grade reading level and explain or act out what it is like in these relationships and the impact, if I can use colorful examples that each jury member may have endured in their life and educate them, then we move away from case law and we start to influence the jury with the reality of the impact on the victim.
I know there's a lot of confusion, for example, with Sean Combs and Cassie's relationship, and they thought because she's elected to stay with him and apparently seemed to love him, that how could that have been abusive? And yet I still remember that hotel tape that got leaked. Yeah, it must have frustrated you to see that case go the way that it did.
I thought it was horrible. And what, for me, it was horrible because these women were being brutalized on the stand, re-traumatized, but no one was there to protect them. We had the government as the lawyers calling these witnesses, and then we had the cross-examination beating them up, but they didn't have their lawyers there to protect them or to object. So it was just, they didn't have emotional support animals, which would have been fantastic. They weren't given breaks. Their names were doxed all over the internet. Everybody knows who the women are now. And they were pushed so far on the stand that they weren't misremembering. They were so traumatized and fogged out from the pressure and the persistence, and exactly what Sean Combs would do to them was playing out right there on the stand.
Yeah, and that's the other thing we don't understand is how memory gets encoded in trauma, which is different how memory gets encoded when we're not being traumatized.
Yes.
And the way that it gets recalled looks different even. Yeah.
Right. So for them to be called not credible because they were forced to do drugs and the trauma would, oh my God, 7 days. I mean, just ongoing sex parties. It is impossible for anyone to be objective.
Yeah. So how do you then work with this then when you know that you've got someone dangerous and you're trying to then convince the jury and others that they really are? What is it that you point out to help people see the risk? Because I bet they look so credible in that room. Sean Combs looked good.
Oh, he was reading a Bible and he wore a different color sweater every single day.
Exactly, dressed up and smiling.
And he was doing a little heart.
I know.
Oh, his children were there.
He was grooming everybody in that room.
His children were there. How fantastic to hear about him masturbating in a corner in a 75-degree room covered in baby oil, dripping hot candle wax on people. Lovely. But the biggest failing in that trial, and I think in the Johnny Depp trial with Amber Heard, so many trials have been happening lately. I think the biggest failing is that the lawyers do not understand how to use the expert. So we had Dr. Dawn Hughes come up for the Diddy trial, and she was also in the Johnny Depp trial, and she was not used well enough. The questions could have been used in a way to explain to the jury more and have a greater impact. But with Sean Combs, they really focused on domestic violence when they should have had Dawn explain coercion. They should have had Dawn explain the trauma response in the moment. Why doesn't she just leave? Well, that's a very thick question to somebody who's been abused for years. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll keep this in the interview or not, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it because I don't know. See what you think. I watched Justin Bieber's behavior through this whole court trial, and he doesn't look good. He's looking really bad.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that wonders what degree this has re-traumatized him. And because I think Sean Combs was dangerous to everyone.
Yeah.
I think he was I think his victim type is quite broad.
Yes.
And so it's been alarming to see the repercussions when victims are not believed and then the consequence of that. And I think Bieber's, whatever's happening to him is an example of that. And I was wondering what you thought, if you noticed the same thing.
I mean, definitely. We saw him at a concert, I don't know, and he was singing and everyone was like, oh, she's taking care of him. She's hugging him. No, he was fading out on drugs.
Right. I mean,
there was actually the position
exactly.
He put himself in.
Right.
But we have so many celebrities and so many musicians who have been harmed by people like Sean Combs. And now they have public platforms and we are watching them completely fall apart. I mean, look at Amanda Bynes. Look at Britney Spears. I mean, they should not be able to have platforms if it's clear that they're not well and no one's protecting them.
Yeah. I think that's what's tragedy in this, is no one's protecting them. Well, this has been, I mean, you and I could go on for hours. There's so much to cover. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface. In fact, I hope I can have you back on again another time. But I would love to talk about in the podcast extra what signs that we could be on the lookout for, that we may have met somebody, whether it's a neighbor or maybe it's even the handyman that shows up, or whatever form that person presents in our life, how we can recognize it. Because I've noticed that there's a public naivete that we assume that because people seem so nice and there's such a civility presented initially, that they must be a good person. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about how to spot the danger a little faster. But how can people find you and a little bit more out about you?
drlesliedobson.com is my website. I'm mostly active on Instagram and TikTok. Hopefully we get to keep TikTok. And I have a YouTube channel, which sometimes I go on my own tirades on, but mostly it's used for my iHeartRadio podcast, Intentionally Disturbing. And so I put that up on my YouTube, and then the podcast is available on every platform through iHeart, anywhere you get a podcast. So I don't know, there seems to be a million places. And then what else? I have a book out called The Friend Cleanse, how to get rid of vampires in your life, energy-sucking vampires. On my website, I have a free little game where you can practice placing people on a sphere and see how your energy changes.
Oh, I love that.
And then I've been in some television, mostly about serial killers and psychopaths. And I have a big show coming out in September, and then a pretty massive show coming out again in 2026. So,
well, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
wonderful.
keep it all on my website, and it's all in vein of what we've talked about, but with really good producers and production, so it makes it a lot more entertaining.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation today. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club, at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.